I'll start at 7:02 here. So welcome. And as we're coming into the Zoom room, I would really invite people to go ahead and keep your cameras on. This is one of the few times we have a chance to interact with our team and our people. So we're very glad to have you. Hopefully you should be able to chat with one another and say hi. We can pretend we are actually in a room together. And maybe someday be back out at immigration court together in mass. I'm sure they'd love that if we all showed up at once. So, all right. And I know we'll have people coming in as as the evening goes on, but I wanted to just welcome everyone again here. My name is Michelle Garnett McKenzie. I'm Deputy Director at the Advocates for Human Rights. And I'm so excited to have this time to share the report that has been underway for about a year on Bearing Witness in the Moment, a report from the Immigration Court Observation Project. I'm Deputy Director at the Advocates, as I said, and for those of you who don't know who the Advocates for Human Rights is, we're a nonprofit, non-governmental organization. We're based here in Minnesota. I say that, I could be anywhere. You have no idea where I am. We're based in Minnesota, and we work to engage volunteers in demanding internationally recognized human rights standards in our home community and in partnerships around the globe. Last year, with more than 1,300 volunteers, we worked together to combat the backlash against human rights of women and LGBTI persons. We worked to advocate for the worldwide abolition of the death penalty. We worked on developing protocols and responses to prevent and combat human trafficking here in Minnesota. We worked on demanding accountability for extrajudicial executions. And as many of you are here tonight to do and are in partnership with us, we work to defend the human rights of refugees and immigrants in the United States. In partnership with our volunteer attorneys and volunteer interpreters, and with the support of a growing ecosystem of accompaniment partners, the Advocates for Human Rights provided legal help in more than 1,100 cases of people in the upper Midwest, living in the upper Midwest of the US last year. We represent asylum seekers fleeing persecution or torture, unaccompanied children, victims of human trafficking, and people detained in ICE custody. Last year, our clients came from nearly 50 countries around the world. So that's who the Advocates is. I know we have some board members in the room. We have many volunteers who have volunteered outside of the Immigration Court Observation Project. And of course, we have an amazing array of our Immigration Court observers, our monitors here with us tonight. We also have some folks from other programs around the country, for activists and advocates in this space, and we're really excited to share what we've learned and really how we can envision a new way forward for our immigration laws, policies, and practices. I have the honor tonight of presenting an overview of the findings and recommendations of our Bearing Witness report. I will do that briefly before turning to our panel discussion with a number of our court observers, facilitated by Project Coordinator Extraordinaire Amy Lang. For those of you who don't know, it's courtobserver@umn.edu. Amy Lang is our project coordinator and has worked tirelessly to keep the Immigration Court Observation Project running during a really challenging time during COVID, and to really foster a climate of inclusion and of action for our court observers, and to develop and really foster a good rapport with our immigration court as well. Now tonight, we're talking about a report that we put up on the website, so I guess that's published yesterday. This is Bearing Witness in the Moment, report from the Immigration Court Observation Project. And I think we'll put the link to that in the chat. We have a short version, executive summary and recommendations, and the full report out there, and we'd love to have you take a look at it, and of course use this as you are active in your advocacy. Before I dig into findings and what we've done, I just have to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. As I said, we have advocates, activists, and court observers here. With so many of us, we won't be going around the room to introduce everyone, but please do connect with one another and with us throughout the evening. And we will be having a short introduction. We'll go to the panel. We'll have questions in the chat. So I would normally at this point in any introduction in an in-person room tell you where the bathrooms are, but I'll leave that to you. You should all know the answer to that question. So welcome and thank you for joining us. The Immigration Court Observation Project launched following the mobilization opposing the Muslim ban in early 2017. Lawyers at Robbins Kaplan, one of our project partners, law firm here in Minnesota, the Binger Center for New Americans at the University of Minnesota Law School, and immigration lawyers in the private immigration bar had spearheaded efforts at the airport, and were looking for a way to channel the energy and the outrage against the administration's actions into a focused effort on, really looking at long overdue systematic changes to a toxic immigration system. For people practicing immigration law, we knew how difficult the practices, how stacked the deck was for immigrants and refugees who face this system as a life-defining power. They knew, but for too many people in the United States, it was really a closed system. Now, together with the Center for New Americans and Robbins Kaplan, we launched this Human Rights Defender Project to get legal representation and public monitoring into the detained immigration courtroom here in Minnesota. Now, when we kicked off this project, none of us really had any idea how it would unfold. We recorded a little intro video, orientation video that I'm afraid too many of you saw of, kind of introducing the project, put up an observation form and got going. Thanks to the Center for New Americans, we were able to create a data collection system for that, so that we have a robust system, both online and importantly human, to do the inputting. Kirsten Yeager, who many of you may remember, really took over organizing and trying to slot in by hand where volunteers could go out and create instructions on how you could find your way into the courtroom, and really brought us together as a group of volunteers, inviting people to get together in the spring of 2018 to convene for the first time. It was, up until that point, really a solo effort, where you download your forms, go out and report, and send them back in. But since it began, more than 650 individuals, and Amy probably will be able to tell us an exact number, it's probably closer to 700 by now, have observed thousands of detained removal hearings at the Fort Snelling Immigration Court. Some people have been out there 1 or 2 times, maybe as part of a class. Others have been out there between 100 and 200 times. I'm looking at you, Peter. This is an extraordinary level of engagement. So we can go to the next slide. I am forgetting that Lindsay is my slide runner here. And why don't you go on to the next one? Thanks. So trial monitoring is a really fundamental practice in international human rights law. It underscores the right to a fair public trial. Just being present in the courtroom is in itself an exercise of this important right. Monitoring fosters transparency and accountability of the judicial process itself. And it can serve as a diagnostic tool that contributes to an assessment of the functioning of our judicial systems. We know that for too long, the immigration enforcement system has really been hidden from view from most US citizens. The Immigration Court Observation Project is a little window into that system. It is the only public place we can go. We can't send you out to the airport to watch planes take off. We can't be present in those discussions at the border where nobody's allowed in. We can't get into so many places, but we can get into a courtroom. Now, US immigration law has long acted as a tool of white nationalism. It's defined eligible for citizenship and who is an alien. It's set up laws defining eligibility for citizenship as a free white person. Those gave way to Asian exclusion laws and national origin quotas that really were focused on stemming the arrival of undesirable aliens. You'll look back in history and see the Undesirable Alien Act in the 1920s. And in 1965, when our immigration framework last was updated, Congress replaced this race-based system with one based on family immigration petitions, hailed by nativists as a backdoor national origin quota intended to maintain the racial balance in the country. Today, we spend more than $25 billion every year to exclude and expel people. Asylum seekers are summarily locked up, left to languish in makeshift camps in Mexico while awaiting their hearings, or separated from their children and families at the border. Nationwide, our detention capacity has at times exceeded 50,000 people. The system that we have operates largely as it was designed. And while the outgoing administration has done untold damage to immigrant and refugee communities, it has accomplished this without statutory changes. We need to be knowing what's going on and making policy that fulfills our values. Can you jump to the next slide? Thank you. So you've noticed some illustrations here on the slideshow, and if you've had a chance to look at our report, you'll see them there too. The Bearing Witness report includes the works of Anita White, who I think is here with us tonight. Her observations were recorded as the illustrations you see here and throughout the report. And we are so grateful to Anita for sharing her dynamic illustrations. They really convey the emotion and the chaos of a bewildering immigration system. The report that we have here really draws on what observers have shared with the advocates about their motivations, their experiences, their perceptions, and recommendations. We looked at volunteer applications. If you've signed up to be a volunteer court observer, we ask you, why did you do that? We surveyed our observer volunteers, and we invited you to participate in small group discussions. And with the help of two volunteers with decades of qualitative research experience, Peter Frederick here and Michal Moscow, we analyzed what observers shared. That's really the substance and the data set from this report. And we learned right off the bat, you can go to the next slide. We learned that volunteers take action, right? That is one of the most exciting takeaways from the report. We know that volunteering with the project has had an impact on you beyond the data that's collected. It's impacted the people who are in the courtroom. We know being in the immigration courtroom has been a profound experience for many people, and it's led importantly to taking action. You can see that when we asked observers what you've done as a result of participating, it's extremely high rates of action on everything from calling members of Congress, to writing an op-ed, to Facebooking, to engaging in difficult conversations. And we know that having witnessed the deportation hearings, you're now equipped to have those deep, difficult conversations with family, with friends, with colleagues about immigration laws and about immigration that we know are essential to countering hate and disinformation. So one of the takeaways here is that the experience is important and transformational to the people who are actually bearing witness. Next slide. So as we dug into the responses, some of key themes emerged. Observers were struck by how few legal immigration options exist. They were frustrated to learn that the due process protections that they've come to expect in criminal proceedings, which we know also fall short of protecting people's basic rights in far too many situations and in really racially biased ways. But even those protections were absent in immigration proceedings. Observers were shocked by things that those of us who have worked in the system have come to expect. Inadequate language access, no public defender system, inadequate access to free legal services, a system which appears to churn people through with little regard for human dignity. Now, the defects that observers identified fell into really four main categories: just laws, due process, non-discrimination, and dignity. And these are really core international human rights standards that organically observers who were not asked to monitor for human rights compliance saw as the defects. So we can go on to the next slide. There's top line unjust laws. People reported there's no pathway for so many people. The government is looking for ways to systematically remove people from this country and deport them. The law is unfair and unjust, so court is like theater. It just doesn't seem like justice at all to send a person back who's been here all their life. That was really permeating the findings of the court observers. As one observer put it, the system is rigged, right? That's not justice. Next slide. So some of the recommendations that we had there are really that we need to develop and implement policies that protect human rights. And it needs to be here in the country of destination, it needs to be in transit, it needs to be pre-migration. This is something that the global community is really wrestling with, a people-centered immigration and migration policy for the 21st century. And I think this really aligns with what we're seeing from the findings of the people sitting in immigration court. And next slide. So one of the things that we'd like you to focus on as we are moving into action, we are looking forward here to building a better immigration system, is really looking at a new immigration framework that promotes dignity and well-being of migrants. Our immigration laws have been designed with many benchmarks, none of them with human rights compliance. So making some concrete steps to amend immigration laws that prevent people from actually getting status or keep people undocumented. Repealing laws that just mandate detention and deportation categorically without giving people an individual hearing based on their situation, on the merits of their case. Making sure nobody's deported to face human rights violations. And importantly, working at the state level to ensure that our criminal justice system doesn't result in disproportionate immigration consequences. So looking at common sense justice reform throughout our system, not just focused on immigration, but on the justice system as a whole. Next slide. So I'll have you advance there. So the next set of key findings is an unfair process, lack of access to counsel, and the failure to ensure understanding of and access to the process really, really jumped out at court observers. And again, this is something that those of us who go into court on a regular basis with clients have come to not only accept, but expect, right? There's no public defender system. There are just a handful of organizations that provide free legal services on a list that's given out to people. And I remember Peter mentioning, that's absurd how few legal services there are, right? The failure to provide public defenders for every detainee was a surprise, said one observer. Defendants need attorneys and many don't have them. Not having counsel is the biggest obstacle. And really, as one person said, the stakes are just too high and the tools are too few to not be provided an attorney. People were also just struck by the lack of adequate or incomplete interpretation in court hearings, especially problematic where interpreters were telephonic, and at the complete lack of any language assistance or support in completing complex applications in English for people who are in detention. The sort of absurdity of giving somebody a multi-page form in technical English immigration law language and expecting that to be returned completed by somebody who has no English language skills whatsoever, and having the judge tell the person, find somebody in jail who can help you, was seen as grossly inadequate. So one of the recommendations coming out that you're seeing here is just ensuring that our system that makes such weighty decisions in people's lives has the process that should attach to that. We've operated under a legal fiction, really, that that deportation proceedings, that exile is not a punishment, so it doesn't have the same procedural protections that criminal punishment does. And this report was really, the findings here were really calling out that distinction needs to be eliminated, and we need to have those protections in place. The next slide. Thank you. Core things like making sure people can understand their rights, options, and have a meaningful opportunity to pursue them. Legislating for universal representation, funding a public defender system or representation for all. Removing the immigration court from the Department of Justice. There was a lot of concern raised by court observers about actual or perceived political interference by the administration because the immigration court works within and reports to the Attorney General, and making sure that there was funding to actually have a fully functioning immigration court system, complete with the interpretation that's needed, with the language support, with the access to justice that's required of a system that makes such decisions in people's lives. Next slide. The next set of findings was really around unequal treatment. A core principle of human rights is non-discrimination, and discrimination was rife, and racial discrimination was rife and embedded in what people saw in the immigration court system. People talked about trumped up charges against people, ending up in court because they didn't acknowledge a police officer and ended up in jail and getting turned over to ICE. One person said, I've only seen one white person in immigration proceedings, maybe an Eastern European person. It's a racist system. When you're observing an immigration court, it is virtually universal that people are from Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And we know there are undocumented white people in the United States. The effects, the magnification of racial profiling throughout the justice system is felt, and in the immigration enforcement system itself. So next slide. Some of the recommendations we have there include just ending entanglement with the criminal legal systems and really having those separation policies in place, dismantling underlying criminal justice systems that are broken and discriminatory, places within our state and federal systems that criminalize, police, prosecute, and incarcerate Black, Indigenous, and other communities of color at disproportionately high rates, reducing levels of incarceration, and ensuring access to documentation for people. These were, sort of the fundamental common sense recommendations that came out of the non-discrimination bucket. And next slide. Finally, we have dignity. And court observers were just, at top of the list of things that were disturbing was the degrading treatment, the use of shackling and prison attire that people facing deportation were treated to. And observers noted that this went beyond impacting just their psyche and their ability to show up with dignity in the courtroom, but also worked as a coercive factor in getting people to give up and self-deport, give up and sign for their deportation, even when they had legal remedies or options available. And as one observer said, by the time I see them, they're so worn down. They have so many appearances. They're completely numb. They have no capacity to stand up for themselves. Is there room in the system for non-lawyer support and advocacy? It's a complex system if they don't have anyone. We've all seen somebody who just gives up because they can't be in detention anymore. They say, I can't stand this anymore. And as one observer noted, that's part of the whole, that's part of the goal, that's the system to get people to take that deportation order. That reliance on degrading treatment as a coercive factor is baked into our immigration system, and observers were offended by that. You can go to the next slide. So here, we're getting back to basics. Recognize the dignity of human beings in the design and implementation of our immigration policies. That has to be our demand here. Our recommendation is so fundamental here. Ensure no one is subjected to torture or degrading treatment or punishment. We routinely hear people who are held in solitary confinement for prolonged periods of time in violation of international standards. People are subject to what's called arbitrary detention simply because of those mandatory detention laws. There are so many ways that this system violates basic human dignity, and we recommend really focusing on that in its design and implementation. Next slide. Some of the specifics are getting rid of those mandatory detention laws, ending the use of solitary confinement, especially prolonged solitary confinement or solitary confinement of anyone with a disability, so that we comply with international law. Demanding transparency at all levels, the city, county, state, and federal government, and not just in the policy, but in the dollars, because that is really a driver of the system. And in holding decision makers accountable, including our policymakers, for making sure that there are prevention and that human rights violations are prevented and people are held accountable for them. So I will stop there and turn things over to Amy. We had a tremendous amount of information gathered in the course of this, and we're going to turn now to reactions from our panelists, from long-term immigration court observers, facilitated by Amy. We'll be taking questions again, as we said, and then we'll just come back at the end with some ideas of ways you can get involved and take action to improve the system. So Amy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I just, again, have to thank Anita, who went to court with me a few times and really brought to life what happens there. So thank you, Anita White. I can't tell you how many times we've shown these drawings because they describe things that are unimaginable unless you see it. And I want to, again, thank all the people who volunteered on this project. I think there have been close to 700 now, but really a core of people who've, it seems like, have made this their life's work. And it has gotten me through, it's been the balm of hope through this hard time. So I want to thank you. As Michelle said, when she started, one of the things this project, this report set out to do was figure out who decides to come to court and why do they do it and how does this impact them. And I'm going to ask Joan Neymark to speak to that because Joan has been our #1 recruiter. She has recruited more volunteer observers than anybody else, bar none. And so I want Joan to just speak about kind of how this has impacted her and what she's done as a result. So Joan?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'm seeing some of my recruits on the screen here, so that's kind of fun. Welcome, everybody. So I started like many of us. I was horrified by the headlines back a few years ago. At church, I learned to push back through actions of sanctuary, accompaniment, and resistance. I was introduced to Amy and joined her in immigration court in June 2018. Other volunteers from the report have also joined through their faith community, while others came from class, from their friends and family, advocacy networks, or even doing a Google search. I thought we're all very creative and passionate about this, but we share a common belief that doing something is critical. Bearing witness is essential. Telling the story of what we see is imperative if we want to change the systemic injustice out there. I've been in immigration court a few times a month for the last 2.5 years. Peter beats me. I grant him that. Each time is the same, but it's still different. And that's because it's all about individuals who have unique stories and compelling living history. A minister in the early days noticed that the machinery of injustice grinds on in the background of what otherwise seems like a normal, ordinary procedure. How to reconcile an orderly machine and the destruction of families and individuals, which is what we see in court. People who have been here 10, 20 years, they have families, homes, and jobs. I think of my Italian immigrant grandparents 100 years ago, who were at that time viewed as diseased and dirty and unwelcome. They lived in a community of non-English speakers and raised their families like the people I see in court all the time. But they didn't face a machinery working hard to expel them like today. So I have to pay it forward. From the start, I brought others with me to witness the reality behind those headlines. Before COVID, we were able to be in the courtroom and smile and nod and affirm their humanity to those orange-suited, shackled detainees as they came through those heavy jail doors into the courtroom. The drawings in the report are incredibly helpful, so thank you, Anita, so much, because the people who have not seen it, I think they give you a sense of what goes on and the feelings behind it. Some of my recruits became observers, like some of you. And we also had a need in those early days to process it. You know, it's a very individual thing. You go into the courtroom and you don't know what to do with all this stuff that you're walking away with. So we met offline to kind of share notes and talk about it and see what that meant. And now there's a regular forum. I just have to applaud Amy because she's done so much to support all of us observers. Yes, Amy is awesome. But in those early days, we kind of had to take that into our own hands to try and figure out what we were seeing. Some people wrote opinion pieces. All of us told our families and friends, this can't be hidden. Everyone should know. And now we have a mentor program, so I don't have to take people in on my own individually. So those headlines pulled me in, but now I go deeper. News and analysis and opinion. I send Amy articles regularly. I don't know if she really appreciates it or not, but I can't help it. It's good to share. And I understand so much more now after sitting in courtroom 5 week in and week out for so long. I read and I learn from the experts. I go to those First Fridays things by advocates and I just try and absorb it, even though it's incredibly complicated and I really don't understand so much of it. I'm a pen pal with another organization, Conversations with Friends, and I had a pen pal, someone who is in detention in Freeborn for 2 years. I support petitions and actions and march for immigration change and reform. I donate to support those who are directly impacted by this unjust system, people who need rent, for instance, and to the organizations working on their behalf, like advocates. I share information about bond funds. I have Amy printed up little cards for me for the Minnesota Freedom Fund that I've handed out 4 of them so far to people in the courtroom, attorneys or individuals, because they had bond granted and now what do they do with it? And I make referrals for representation and that feels really powerful. And I reflect, I carry it with me. On a personal side, it's powerful and harsh and disturbing. What must it be like to be shuffled through our baffling system, our baffling immigration system? And I'm not even speaking the language. So many are handcuffed, even for a video visit in the facility where they live their lives. Like I said, some at Freeborn have been there for years and they don't get to breathe fresh air or see the sun or the sky. I've noticed this, many deportees and detainees are named Jesus. Just think about that. How many Jesus have we deported and detained in our system? The conveyor belt, though, number 461 is next, is overwhelming. They're numbers, they're not people. I write their names down, even though we don't need that and we're supposed to destroy it if we do write it down. But I write them down to remind myself that they're people with innate dignity and worth. I whisper prayers of support and that they will ask for an attorney if asked if they want one. Please, 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 just say yes, you want time to look for an attorney. So I am grateful for this work to create a more just world through our moral witness. And we make a difference together, I'm firmly convinced. And again, a big shout out to our fearless, tireless leader, Amy.
Thank you for that, Joan. I didn't ask her to say that. So I wanted to say something before I pass it along that, you know, we ask observers to document what's happening in the courtroom and what they make of it, but we don't really ask them to make recommendations. But so that's what this report was, really to learn about what their perceptions were, how this has impacted them and what their perceptions were. And as Michelle said, we didn't give them a human rights framework. We just said, you're interested in going, we'll train you to understand what our little documentation form means and what some of the terms are. And then you go in there and witness. And really, people come out with the human rights framework because it's so obvious. And so, you know, this report really looks at the impact on the observers. It looks at what would justice be, and then where are all the breakdowns? What are the due process barriers? And Michelle quoted some of this, but my favorite line in the entire report, which I believe Michelle wrote, I definitely didn't, but observers question the legitimacy of a system where laws appear unable to do justice, even when procedures were followed. And so I just want to raise up a few of the quotes that are in there about the lack of ability to do justice, which is baked into the system. That's not a default of the system. That is the design of the system to really, no matter what your roots are here, to cut out avenues for you to stay. So in observing, if you keep going, you understand the process, but it's important to keep telling yourself that even though it is normal, it's not justice. If they have a good attorney or a good case, that doesn't necessarily translate to justice if the system, the laws are inherently unjust. The court in this setup of the court is unjust, un-American, and goes against our history of immigrants. Another said, it doesn't seem like justice at all to send a person back who's been here all their life. People living here for 15 years, living right, doing the right things and making it in their community, get detained and deported, and their whole family is still here. This seems to be happening more and more. Another said, the judges are following procedure, but our laws need to change. If people have been here for 15 plus years, why aren't they allowed to become a citizen or pass a test? And over we heard, it's not a just system, it's stacked against immigrants. So, you know, a lot of the barriers we see are really from legislation, but some of them, as Michelle said, are administrative rules, legal precedents written by the Attorney General, and executive orders. But I'm going to have more of our panelists speak to some of these barriers. And so I'm going to ask Florence, if you'd unmute yourself and just talk some about the language barriers and what people face.
I unmuted myself. That was a language barrier for me. But thank you, everybody, for coming. I mean, to say that language barriers are a major problem in this whole process, you know, is an obvious thing, I think, and an understatement. I mean, it permeates the whole process. I would say even more than permeates. It sabotages the whole process, or supports the whole process. As some speakers have said, it's how the process is supposed to work is how it's working, even though it may appear broken to us. But the language barriers present themselves at every stage of this process, whether it's border control at initial detention, whether it's ICE detention once someone is within the U.S., detention itself, trying within detention to navigate trying to find an attorney, or even if you want to engage in self-help, to try to find resources. I mean, even language barriers aside, recently I heard a detainee being encouraged / chided by a judge, like, why don't you do some research about, you know, the conditions in your home country and why you can't return there, and why don't you find an attorney? Oh, we don't have a computer at our center. Oh, we haven't had a working phone in weeks. So I mean, even if someone's spunky enough and bright enough and resilient enough to try to overcome these language barriers, I mean, we've got technology issues that stand in their way. So trying to find an attorney to navigate the bond procedure. I mean, people who can, this goes a little outside my parameters of my jurisdiction here right now, but trying to find an attorney to get out on bond. I mean, if you can get out on bond, it is literally an amazing thing to happen. I mean, if someone can get out on bond, they not only buy time, but they get to be with their families if they have families here. They get to go back to their job. They get to establish relationships, employment or faith communities or whatever that will help them eventually when they get to removal proceedings, based on my understanding. And just psychologically. So trying to get an attorney to get bond, and then of course trying to navigate the removal process itself. It's just daunting. I mean, I'm thinking of, you know, I mean, for heaven's sakes, I retired last year, and after I retired is when I started doing this last spring or last summer. English is my first language. I'm a native-born U.S. citizen. I mean, for God's sakes, I'm an attorney. I mean, I would get off the phone with Social Security sometimes, literally in tears. And I have all this privilege, and I'm white, and I'm moneyed. And so I mean, and so when you think of these people, add to this the language barriers, the legal barriers, often facing criminal proceedings, add to that the psychological issues of separation from family, financial crisis, perhaps health issues, certainly perhaps mental health issues. And so this, and then you have an overlay of that they can't communicate and they can't understand. So here, one thing I've noticed is a few things, how this presents itself. One is interpretation in the courtroom. And I think what I've observed over not that long, a year and a half or so, is that shows itself in a few ways. The interpreters in the courtroom, or in the courtroom now, next to the courtroom where we are, seem like they do seems to be a pretty good job. Where I've seen the problems is if they're telephonic interpreters in perhaps a language other than Spanish, and there will be 2 minutes of something spoken by the judge, some very important explanation about alternatives, and then the I don't know, just fill in the blank, Somali or whatever interpreter on the phone will spend 30 seconds interpreting that. I mean, clearly that is not a complete interpretation. Or even within the courtroom or the adjacent courtroom, you know, there aren't enough breaks for the interpretation to possibly be adequate. Secondly, I've seen, and this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but there are conversations judge to attorneys, DHS attorney, or if the detainee is lucky enough to have one, detainee attorney. Or there's conversations between the attorneys, or there might be conversations even between the judge and the clerk that might be something like, this person's applying for asylum, but you know, he hasn't submitted his letters of support, and that is not interpreted. So that means that the detainee doesn't have an opportunity to even contradict that. Like, yes, I have submitted that. I mean, it's profound, this language glitch that can happen even with interpretation. Secondly, and Michelle mentioned this, are forms. I had just a situation that I observed that just made me want to pull my hair out. This gentleman, the detainee came applying for asylum, had completed all his asylum forms, which are in English, by paying another detainee who, according to him, as interpreted, his English was okay, the guy he paid to fill out the forms, and mailed them to the judge, to the court. The court didn't get them, just didn't get them. And then the judge said, well, you're just going to have to do it again. You're going to have to do it again. So he had to go pay someone else with God knows what English skills they're able to have. I mean, I'm sure they're better than my Spanish skills, which is zero. But so it has to go through all that again. And the asylum forms are in English. I mean, that's just ridiculous. At least the asylum forms he was given were in English. I don't know if that's always the case. And secondly, this flip-flopping too that I think it was Michelle mentioned. I mean, some of these poor people, they have 2 or 3 minutes. They change their mind about life-altering decisions more often than I would about buying a pair of socks. They come in, they want a bond. And then the judge says, oh, well, I thought I had an attorney who was coming or whatever, but no attorney. Well, do you want more time to find an attorney? No, I just can't stand detention anymore. Let's just go ahead without one. And then the judge will say, well, that's your only chance at bond, or you know, or it becomes clearer that deportation will come with certain bans on reentry and all that. And then the person will go back, well, no, I want a bond. And then the judge gets all exasperated. And because the detainee doesn't understand. And then also the cultural matter, which I think a lot of these people come in and they're either intimidated or they might come from a culture that you do not challenge someone from the government. So they might not correct a misstatement, even if they understand it. They might not feel comfortable challenging something. They might not be comfortable asking for repeated clarification. In fact, I see that some detainees who are very assertive about getting clarification, they often get, I think, very disrespectfully spoken to by some judges for being, taking too much time or why don't you understand kind of thing. But I know I'm probably over my time, so I just wanted to end with this quote from Amy's amazing report made by, it appears like an observer on page 21, but it says, it can't be due process if the detainees don't understand what is happening, don't know what will happen, and can't anticipate the consequence of their actions. I think that just sums it up beautifully about how much is at stake from this inevitable and conscious failure to understand. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florence. And for those of you who haven't been to court, you can see the passion of our observers. It's hard to be dispassionate after you've been there and seen what you've seen. Peter, I'm going to just turn this over to you to make some remarks. Peter Frederick, I think, has done, well, we have somebody else on the, Nancy P. has, I think they might rival, they've done thousands of observations. So take it away, Peter. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you for reminding me to unmute. I often don't do it. I'm technophobic galore. At 83, you know, these things are beyond me. I retired from teaching soon enough that I didn't have to go through all this. I hated PowerPoint just as I was retiring. PowerPoint's just another excuse to lecture, make it a teacher-centered rather than learner-centered. Anyway, I have no passions, but I love yours. I love yours, Florence. The topic that that Amy sketched out for me is, and I'm going to read it because it's important. The intersection of racial justice or injustice, actually, and immigrant injustice. The intersection of these in racial profiling and the criminalization of immigrants. These issues of injustice and the intersection of these different groups is inextricably woven into the report, as it is sadly woven throughout American history. Sadly. As one observer said, sometimes it seems like criminal charges are trumped up. Pun intended, I don't know. Are trumped up and cited examples, a taillight out, a little powder in the glove box, a suspicious person in the neighborhood who had done nothing wrong and is tackled and injured by police. We know all this profiling as my black students used to say, DWB, right? I was arrested for DWB, driving while black, or driving while brown. I think I saw this in one of the observers' comments. A Latino detainee joked about being arrested for a DWR. Know that one? Driving while roofing. He worked as a roofer, driving while roofing. The ICE got him, or he was apprehended there. Immigration court, another observer said, is a difficult process to watch. Most migrants are hardworking and have families, speaking of roofing, just trying to live the American dream. They want to support their family. The most heartbreaking cases are young adults who've never lived outside the US, but are at risk of being deported to their home country. I can tell a long story. I can tell a story about Beto, who was just deported back to Mexico after 8 months in prison, after getting bond, and even after getting bond, getting tricked tricked by ICE to leave Chicago, where he had a stable family and a stable job with his uncle roofing and doing flooring. And Beto was so I'm going to slip it in here. Beto was ordered to go to the Iowa ICE office in Cedar Rapids, where he was apprehended, coming back from vacation with some friends, and there was an open container in their car. He was the passenger. He wasn't even the driver. So, and he said, I can't leave Chicago. I've got a job. I've got work. I've got commitments to the family. He lived with his sister and children in Chicago. He said, can't we do this over telephone? Can't we do this? I don't want to drive. It's a pandemic. I've got commitments. Drive all the way to Des Moines, to Cedar Rapids for an ICE interview. And we wrote letters, a lot of us, and he was denied. And he went back, so he had to go. And he was there on June 10th, and on June 11th, he was on a plane deported back to Mexico, which he had left when he was age 8. What does he know of Mexico? The recent story is one of the last stories that I encountered in the late spring. Everything is stacked against the detainee. It is a racist system burdensome to the poor. Listen to that sentence, a racist system burdensome to the poor. That one observation perfectly sums up Isabel Wilkerson's prize-winning book now, first on Time's book, nonfiction book of the year, Caste. Title is Caste. It's about precisely the intersection of these issues of race and immigration and refugees and poverty. The court is a racist system burdensome to the poor, shows this intersection with, of course, the book is permeated by white male supremacists, people who look like me, clearly as the top caste, always. And it's get it for the holidays, for a Kwanzaa present. Read it. It's a terrific book, and it's about this precise issue. So now I want you to just sort of role play a little bit and come with me to revisit moments I'm sure most of the observers have seen, most of you have seen, rather witnessed. I love that word witness in the title of this report, witness and moments. So come to a moment. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon, any day, any judge. It's going to be a repeatable pattern. Late afternoon is so different from mornings. All the hearings with defendant attorneys are done. They go first. Only pro se, speaking for them, oneself, detainees are seen in the late afternoon. Families are rarely present, other than the judge and his clerk or her clerk, and the DHS attorney and a guard and the Spanish interpreter and detainee. I'm the only one left in the gallery. Or maybe Joan is there, Florence or Gus also, because we double up on shifts. So faithful they are. The still door clunks, and in, orange with shackles, come almost all young male Mexicans, Hondurans, Salvadorans, Guatemalans, speaking Quiche, can't pronounce it right, rather than Spanish, or a little of both. Almost all young. An occasional Somali or Liberian, but one after another they come in and the judge says, "Do you know why you're here?" Or she holds up a paper and says, "Have you seen this? It's a notice to appear and an I-2-113." Took me 6 months before I could finally figure out what the I-213 was. I'm still not entirely sure. I think it's the arrest or the apprehension that finally brought them in, whether or not they'd done a crime. So the judge does this, and I want to take a break and set the context. What we see next, what we've all seen next, is a sad tension between the script and the story, between judge and detainee. The judge wants to follow an administrative script for efficiencies of time and litigious covering their butts. It's in the script. Sounds good sometimes, but the realities are different. The judge is under pressure of a huge backlog of cases and wants to, quote, move forward. He wants to, the detainee, on the other hand, wants to tell his or her story. Why I came here, my dreams, why I want to stay, what happened that night I was arrested, how the police wrote it up all wrong. Did you get from the police the statement, the police record? No, I didn't dare go into police to the police station. ICE will be there and arrest me. Sometimes the judge's questions, cultural gap, don't have a clue as to what it's like living as an undocumented person in this country. So the detainee wants to tell that story, and the huge power differential between judge and detainee, almost as large and larger than the cultural barrier between them. And I took a list, Florence, you listed cultural barriers, language barriers, legal barriers, financial barriers, psychological, family barriers, all at once acting on this young man, 23 years old, in orange, in shackles, in the judge's court in the late afternoon. You know the rest. After an often mumbled and rapid reading of the script, the judge presses on. Does the detainee want an attorney or not? You want an attorney or not? The judge wants a yes, a C for the record. Attorney might shake his head or not shake his head. He wants a yes for the record. The detainee is confused. Why was I awakened at 4 a.m. and driven in a locked van from Freeborn or Sherburne jail to the court? Why am I here? Judge is patient, finally offers a week to think about it. in detention. Detainee accepts. And then does he get bond or she get bond or not? We don't know how it moves forward. I'm almost done. Turns out there's two parts, bond and removal. Even the judges don't always get it clear. And certainly half of the attorneys we see aren't clear about so-and-so, Judge so-and-so does only bond on Monday, but the other one only does bond on Tuesdays and does both and combines them, but then the judge does on Thursdays. And I even saw a professor from the law school in the U, who's a prominent professor. He came in with a couple of immigration law students of his, and the judge had to kind of explain to him why he was there on the wrong day. So it's terribly baffling and complicated. Turns out the second part is removal. Maybe you get past the bond hurdle, but now there's the removal, or you don't get bond and you're still in prison for how long? Beto was in jail for 8 months. 4 questions. They get to the pleadings. 4 questions. 1, we know them. We all know them by heart. 1, are you a citizen of the United States? No. Are you a citizen of Mexico or of what country are you a citizen? Guatemala. See? Did you cross on this date at that place? On or about this date on and that place? Yes, or they'll correct the name of the place. Yeah. And the fourth is the key one. Did you have papers or were you approved by a border official when you entered the United States? If the answer is no, then the judge declares the detainee is unlawfully or illegally entered into the United States and is therefore removable. That pronouncement criminalizes every migrant in this country, even if he was never guilty of any crime. Or for some minor crimes, 2 DUIs or drugs, removal is mandatory. Witnessing this happen, as many of us have, brings observers to tears, especially if it's now go to the morning, the families in the courtroom, and they're in tears, and we're in tears. How many of you in this room right now that I can't see found yourself at some point in that gallery in tears? Under the guise of legal niceties about rights and relief options and appeals for removal or for rejection of bond, as one observer put it, this process is full of outrages, systematic racism, and a deck stacked against immigrants. How many of us have mentioned that one tonight? Another, the machinery of immigration court is like a factory mill grinding people through it to inevitable ends. The statistics are horrible on asylum decisions, positive asylum. I'm getting corrected, I think, on some of my facts. The system is all about 4 Ds: demeaning, demoralizing, detention, and deportation. And the script wears down the story, as we've said. They're broken. Strong, powerful people are broken by the constant detention, and the script beats the story because the differential in power is so enormous. Immigration court, literally and metaphorically, in my last quote, is, quote, cold and uncaring. Cold, literally cold, and metaphorically cold, and literally often, too often, uncaring. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Powerful words. Miriam, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you're going to speak more about the barriers to legal representation.
So a lot has already been by Joan, Florence, and Peter talked about, it's hard not to talk about attorney representation. And I think Joan said it, I think we've all gone there, like when the judge asked, do you want an attorney? Do you want time to find an attorney? We're all under our breath, like, please, please ask for an attorney, even if you can't get one, just ask for one, we've all, a lot of us have seen the list of the three organizations. When I first started, I thought, oh, it's a really long list, for the free and, low cost attorneys. That's not the case. So I remember when I was a Joan recruit, and the first time I went to court, I was totally overwhelmed. And back to what Florence was saying, I speak the language. I've watched Law and Order, and I'm not an attorney, but and I was blown away. And it took probably a year, as like to what Peter said, what's an I-213? I mean, I can't imagine how many times I've looked it up in our, in our guidebook that has been put together for us, which is great. But, imagine, this life-defining event. And for me, it was, I want to be part of the solution. For the detainees, it is life-defining. And I went in there totally overwhelmed for about 6 months. And maybe the next 6 months, I felt a little better. I was going every week. I was seeing multiple cases. Imagine coming in there, even if English is your first language, but so often it's not. And Florence talked really coherently about the issues with the language. And I also remember coming out of there going, I want to be an attorney. And that was, and I was like, oh, God. And I was like, maybe a paralegal. And then, trying to figure out a way, because that was what was so glaring to me. And while I don't know who, Amy, maybe you referenced it, even if they have a good attorney or a good case, it doesn't translate to justice. But at least it's someone who's educated, who understands what the process is, these forms. It's really overwhelming. And I happened to yesterday have to take my father, who's older, and I had to take him to the DMV, and all the stuff I had to get together, all the stuff I had to print and highlight and get his social security card and discover he didn't have one, and call Social Security, imagine that. And then, a few driving restrictions. So I had to call the Department of Public Safety. I was on hold for an hour. I had to call his doctor, on the hold for an hour. And you just think about people trying to, on their own, get documents, and just layer on COVID. And that's how it is 10 times over for people in detention. We're all frustrated, you can't get people because, it's COVID and staffing's different, but you can't even begin to imagine how it is for anyone to get documents. And that's where attorneys can help, and they'll submit, it's a 100-page bond, what's it called? Bond document. Well, I mean, I couldn't put it together 100 pages, but the attorneys know how to do this. And they've been trained in this. And, one thing that, a lot has been said, but one was, due process with consistent rules. And someone in one of the observers said, in the middle of a hearing, the policy had been changed. In the middle of a hearing, the policy had changed in the middle of the day, and the judge had to correct the attorney. Like, how would a non-attorney ever know that? How would someone, we would never know that. And so that's not even consistent, and things are changing all the time. And, this is why we go to professionals. There was someone also in the report, so I don't know how many people, healthcare workers. And they talked about, like, in healthcare, we'd never tell you to ask your neighbor about your brain tumor or get your answers on the internet. But again, as Florence said, we're saying, we've all heard the judge say, well, have someone in detention help you. What? And then you need 3 copies. And again, in English. And that this, the healthcare worker, someone said, consent forms are written at a certain grade level and translated at a certain grade level. Well, I think we could all speak to that. Legalese is not at any grade level I know. And so, legal lingo is different. And it's like, to me, I kept thinking, it's like you hear something and you go look it up. And then in the definition, there's another word you don't understand. And so you have to go look that up. And it's this, and so if you don't have basically, if you don't have an attorney, you're screwed. And I think it's proven in the quantitative data that has been collected from the observation forms. And it's such an overwhelming process, life defining, that, I think we all had this point where you go, what do you mean they don't get an attorney? What do you mean? That was like part of our system. It's what we grew up believing. And we also grew up believing the burdens on the, prosecution. You're not guilty, you have the, presumption of being innocent. Well, that's not the case here. And so, having said all this, and I think all these topics really relate to each other, but I know I'm sure I will keep muttering under my breath, please ask for an attorney, please ask for an attorney. And hopefully, what excited me in the report was there were two things that one was already mentioned, is there room in the system for non-lawyer support advocacy? I think proven by some of the data, this is a group of observers that really want to do something, get involved in ways that are meaningful. And this report was, excited that this report even, has gone to the judges. And then also there's, the hope of, it was referenced in the report, some Minnesota communities are funding support for universal representation at removal hearings. And that's the first I've heard of that. And that's super exciting. And then one last thing, I just have to say this because I'm always, I'm still shocked by a lot of things every time, when I go. But one is when the DHS lawyers come in with their roller cart of papers. And the amount of paperwork in this system always blows me away. And to think that someone who doesn't have an attorney, who doesn't have access to tools, be it a computer, be it copy machines, be it, all sorts of things, could actually, fill out any forms. And Anita White, the artist, I love the sketches. I noticed in a couple, there's like the staplers noted. And that struck me because there's so much paper. And, I think we all would, throw up our hands having that much paper. And it's not light reading. It's and so I do hope that there will be, some movement to be able to provide, get attorneys for people to at least have a shot on this, for their lives.
Thank you so much, Miriam. I have to say that when people do get out of detention, they come out with whatever clothes they were arrested in, if those haven't somehow been lost, and a plastic bag with all their papers. And that's like their life story. There they are out on the street with a plastic bag with papers. I want to say, to me, the most powerful part of the report is the beseeching from all of the observers saying, just respect human dignity, treat these people as individuals. And if people read nothing else in the report, I hope you will read the section, what we want the judges to know, because it is just beseeching them to respect human dignity. And I want to give the floor to our last panelist, observer Dana, who's really going to speak to the impact on families.
So good evening, and thank you all for coming this evening. What really struck me about the report were observers' comments about family and the dignity that family confers. And explicit in the comments in the report was the notion of shared life aspirations by respondents and observers. To quote from the report, "Take the time to acknowledge the humanity of the folks sitting before you. The detainees are human and just trying to create a better life for themselves, just like all of us. So several years ago, I was in a taxi coming home from the airport with my son and my husband. And it's a really short drive and we were really eager to come home. However, our driver, who I guessed to be Somali, drove as though he had no gas in his tank, and what he had, he wanted to have last. When we arrived at our house, I thanked him for going slowly and for not making it a drag race on the highway. And with great solemnity, this man turned to me and said, "I drove slowly because you are a family." So I think of that anecdote when I think of the individuals who pass through immigration court. Few are there alone. Many have family or loved ones in the courtroom or in the local area. Sitting next to me in court is the father who does not understand why he cannot speak on behalf of his detained son, and who turns to me looking for help as decisions are made. I say nothing. Sitting next to me is the family of a breadwinner who has just received an order of deportation. They begin to mutter amongst themselves, "Well, what now? What are we going to do?" And give me a sideways glance. I say nothing. Sitting next to me is a young mother with a newborn. And I mean, this child was tiny and brand new, who cannot follow the translation or hear the Spanish and doesn't know what has just transpired on the other side of the courtroom barrier. So I ask myself, and I also ask all of you, if the value placed on family is universal, how do we harness that to promote a valid immigration process? If the desire to belong, to have, sorry about that, to have agency, live where providing for your family is a shared value, how do we capitalize on that to promote an immigration policy that serves all parties? And finally, if we all desire to have our dignity remain intact, and I think we all do, how do we ensure that dignity is respected during an immigration hearing? So thank you.
Bless you all for speaking and sharing your
Yeah.
experiences and speaking truth to power and showing your full hearts. And that's the power of this project. We were going to actually close at 8, but now I'm going to say we always plan to close at 8:30. And if people have questions, you can type it into the chat. Michelle, we're going to show a final slide with some, yeah.
And so first, I just want to say I'm so grateful to Amy, to Joan, Florence, Dana, Miriam, Peter for sharing with us, to the entire team who has been part of this process on this call and not on this call. We don't have all 700 people here, but it is just, it's really important to thank you all. And I'm so grateful for you taking time to be in court, to see what transpires on a day-to-day basis and to be ready to take action. And that was such a powerful conversation. We had a number of comments going back and forth. So some of you on the panel may not have seen the conversation, but so check that out. People were really looking at some of the ways that the injustice permeates the system. and raise some really key pieces, one of which is some legislative priorities or opportunities that we have in the state to ameliorate, to really, kind of disentangle some of this and make things better. One of those is a bill to reduce the sentence of gross misdemeanors from 365 days to 364 days. That one change could mean that people aren't facing disproportionate immigration consequences for misdemeanor level crimes that, because of a 365-day sentence, might be termed an aggravated felony and eliminate any defenses to deportation. There will be opportunities to not only talk about legislative stuff at the Minnesota Capitol, but to look at things holistically. This is a chance for us to not look at immigration in a vacuum, but to look at it as part of an overall justice system reform, to try to ameliorate and lessen over-incarceration and mass incarceration, to try to keep people from getting into detention in the first place by better policing practices, by monitoring and reducing racism in the administration of justice. All of that is part of this conversation, and I'd encourage you to think about your lens into the immigration system as sort of a microcosm of the system at large, and how can we be in solidarity with every single part of that movement for justice. If you have not, I don't know if there's one person here who hasn't volunteered in the Immigration Court Observation Project, but if you haven't and you would like to, Amy, court observer at umn.edu, as she is otherwise known, Amy's contact information is on the screen here, and please do reach out. We do have immigration court observation slots going now. They are awkward and stilted, just because of COVID, and we are documenting that. So please join that. We have a sibling program too.
Michelle, I'll just interject that the next training for new court observers is January 4th. So again, you can, if you're interested and you're in town, because it is an in-person volunteer experience, if you email me, I can send you the link to register for that training.
That's right. That's right. You don't have to be in person to go to the training. That will be by Zoom, but you have to be in person to get out to the immigration court to observe it. Even though you will be remotely in the immigration court while you're in person in the immigration court. Yes, Teresa.
There is a question in the chat asking about training for accredited reps in the state of Minnesota.
Right. So accredited representatives are a special function of the immigration system that allows people who are employees of agencies that are recognized agencies by the Board of Immigration Appeals. Recognized agency is an agency that provides low cost immigration legal services and has the supervision of an attorney. There are a number of recognized agencies in Minnesota, Immigrant Law Center, some of the refugee resettlement agencies like International Institute are recognized. If you're an employee of a recognized agency and you go through a 40-hour training, you can become an accredited representative, and that gives you the same access to or ability to represent people in immigration in front of the immigration agencies as an attorney. So you can appear in immigration court or in front of the immigration agencies in non-court proceedings. So if people are interested, you do need to be employed by one of those recognized agencies and then individually accredited through having that training. But it is one of the kind of legacies of having this administrative system that has historically not been one where attorneys operate and where people are able are expected to speak for themselves. So if people are interested in that and don't know somebody here in Minnesota, I would encourage you to look at that clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network clinic is very, very supportive of the accredited rep system and have lots of information available to kind of guide you in what that looks like. And if you have other questions, feel free to get in touch with us. My email is also on the slide, and just like Amy, I think we're delighted to engage people, answer questions, figure out ways that you can take this forward. The observers themselves from that first roundtable at the Center for New Americans, when we sat around and talked with, in an impromptu conversation and had dozens of you show up to share your impact and your observations and your ideas through today. You drive this project. So ideas around how to better advocate, how to better run the project, and how to be as effective as possible. That is what this is about. We know that by doing hands-on human rights work, you all are advocates for human rights. And so we are so grateful that you're part of that movement and part of our community, looking for justice and looking forward to a better day when we will not only get back some of the ground we have lost, but get to a point where we really have a policy that is designed in line with our values, not as a tool of white nationalism. So I think, are there any questions in the chat that haven't been answered? I'll ask the moderators.
I haven't seen any, but a lot of appreciation for Anita's art. And it really is, I will echo all of these sentiments. It really has been so impactful and it's beautiful. So
Yes.
Thank you so much, Anita.
I would like to ask that Lindsay and Teresa show their video and wave to everybody, because this was definitely a collaborative process. Michelle, myself, Lindsay, and Teresa wrote this paper. And just because Michelle and I were speaking doesn't mean we get all the credit. Really, Teresa and Lindsay did a lot of heavy lifting.
Yep, Lindsay is a staff attorney at the Advocate. She is in our research education advocacy unit. And Teresa is our pro bono counsel and works in addition to editing and writing and representing detained Somalis in Miami. She is the person who's the point of contact for all our pro bono relationships and volunteering work. So we are just so glad to have such a powerful team. And I'm so glad to see you all here tonight. It's lonely out there for all of us, and thank you for keeping your videos on so we could be in community here, for doing all the work that you do, and for thinking about taking these recommendations forward in all of the areas you have the ability to impact. This is a time to really use our power and use it for good. So, Amy, finally, thank you. It is amazing to work with you, and we're so honored to have a chance to bear witness with each and every one of you. With that, I think we'll close for tonight and just welcome the new year together as we look forward. So thank you all.
Okay.
Good night.